All right, let's get started. So I'm Kyle Einecker. I'm going to be presenting group, an alternative to organic groups. All right, so group, an alternative to organic groups. So how many of you have used organic groups before? How many of you wanted to bang your head against the wall while you're using it at some point? Yep. So that was the original idea behind creating group, is that there had to be a better way to do this. I didn't create group, it was created by somebody else, but that's what he said. So the boring part, the part about me, I work at DigitalBridge Solutions as a developer. I'm a generalist, but I mostly focus on the back end. Been there for about a year. We focus on medium, small-sized e-commerce shops, so we do a lot of commerce work. On Drupal.org and GitHub, I'm Control A Del. I'm fairly active. Occasionally I'm in IRC. If you have any questions, just hit me up. I don't have a Twitter. I think I'm one of the few people who doesn't. So feel free to tweet at me, to our company Twitter. Somebody will get it to me eventually, maybe, probably. And I believe we're looking for developers. So if you guys are interested, let me know and I'll put you in contact with the right people. And now group. I got into this a little bit. It was created by Christian. I'm not even going to try to say his name. He's an Acquia Grandmaster. I believe he's the original creator. The module's been around since 2013, so it's not exactly new, but it's not exactly really old either. It was originally written in D7. It's currently floating around 1,500 installs, about half of which are of the D8 beta, so it's got a highly functional Drupal 8 beta and a highly functional D7 release. Before we get too far into group though, let's take a high-level look at the problem that group and organic groups tries to solve. So inherently unorganized content is hard to display, it's hard to manage, it's hard to control access to, and it's hard to migrate when you eventually do want to upgrade. So it's really hard to make a meaningful page if your content isn't organized at all, right? You have all this content, but how do I make a page of specific content? It's hard for editors to manage because if they can't find it, they can't manage it. That's just another task they have to do before they can do their job. And if you don't have any access control, well, you can't say what editors can edit it, you can't control who can see it. It's really it's messy. And eventually when you do want to migrate, you probably want to migrate your organizational structure. So if you don't have one, it's going to make your migration a little bit more difficult because you can't make any assumptions about the content. So we do not want our sites to be the equivalent of this. It is messy, it is hard to manage, it is not nice to look at. So what does Drupal provide for solving that problem? There's tagging. You can add, say, keywords about a book, going back to that picture. You could add the genre, the type of book, hardback, softbook, ebook, this type of publication, article, journal, actual book, magazine, that kind of stuff. You could tag it with all kinds of different keywords. You can, say, relate content, relate a book to the author, an author profile, or a series that's a part of. You can implement access control. So if you have a book you want to know is there, you want to know who has access to it and who is able to make modifications to it. And there's a hierarchy. So you probably want to put your books on a bookshelf. You probably want to put them on a specific shelf so you know where they are and that they're easy to find. And this one's a little bit of a niche, hierarchical access control, but I've noticed that once you have access control and hierarchy, people always want hierarchical access control. You want to be able to say, all right, I have this giant group of things. I want this person to be able to manage all of it, and I want some people to be able to manage these parts of it. So in our example, controlling access to specific shelves and bookcases. There's a lot of overlap here. You don't necessarily have to choose one of these to solve a problem. You might end up using multiple, and a lot of times you will. So if you implement those correctly, you get something like this. This is nice to look at. It's easy to control access to. You can point people to a specific spot, or more importantly, they can find what they're looking for themselves. And really, unless you like things messy, this is just so much better than the previous picture. So those are the strategies. What does Drupal give us to implement those strategies? You have taxonomy. Since it's built into core, it's really been expanded to do pretty much all of this. I would say its strengths are mostly around tagging and hierarchy, but if you want to use it to relate content and do access control, it's available, but it's more a pre-built simple solution and not really intended for complex situations. There's entity reference, which is really just for relating content to other content. I don't think it's very good at tagging access control or implementing hierarchy. Then we have organic groups, of course, which can be used for tagging. It's not a great use of it. You can relate content and do access control, obviously. And there's group. Group is a lot like organic groups, but it implements the hierarchy part. So I'll elaborate on that. I've tried to use organic groups to set up a hierarchy to do like a parent group and a subgroup, and I did not have very much luck with it. So maybe it's changed, but I don't think organic groups does the hierarchy very well. The lines between these are often very blurry. There's not usually one best answer. It depends on the situation. You can use any of the tagging solutions, any of the related content. It depends on the problem. So we're going to focus on what organic groups and group really do best, which is relating content and controlling access to that content. Let's take a look at what organic groups and group really have in common. So the strengths, they allow you to group content arbitrarily. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It's really whatever you want, which is really handy. You can arbitrarily group users as members of those groups. But once again, really useful because Drupal doesn't really have anything for that by default. You just kind of have users with roles. And there's access control. So access control is really nice because once again, Drupal is, well, you can view all this content or you can view none of it. There's nothing really in between by default. And both of them integrate with the major contribute modules, views, panels, rules, path auto, features, a bunch of other ones I'm sure I forgot. And then weaknesses, there's obviously a couple. Both of them can be complex to set up. They solve a complex problem, so complexity in setup is kind of expected. It can impact performance. Once again, they are complex, and when you're implementing a complex solution, you need to understand the performance implications of it, especially with if you're doing a lot of access control on a lot of the nodes. You can get unwanted interactions with other access control modules. So I'm actually working through a problem with this right now where a group is interacting poorly with file entity permissions, and it's going to be a solvable problem, but you just have to be aware that there could be conflicts between different modules. And now let's compare group to organic groups. So the advantages. Comparatively, groups is very easy to set up. It's entirely through the interface. You don't have to really create any fields or modify any existing content types. It's all entity-based, so everything is its own entity. It's not reusing nodes or adding fields to nodes. It provides subgroups by default, and this is really where the hierarchy part of it comes in. There's a submodule included with the module that lets groups be children of other groups. And there's also built-in membership inheritance. It's easy to extend. We'll get into the back end of it and kind of give some examples of how easy it is to implement or to reuse the code in group to extend it to do what you want it to do. And it's got a really seamless integration with the user interface. You'd be hard-pressed for a site builder to identify that group was not a part of core by default. And we'll go through it with a live demo, and hopefully you'll agree. So now the disadvantages of group, there are a couple. It's a little bit younger. So it's not organic, as in with organic groups, you can configure settings per group, like per content. So you can change the settings for an article, for a specific article, if it was content. With group, you change the settings for all articles. There's not really a per setting or per group settings. But it does have fields, so you can add fields and they can have their own values. But you're never going to be able to create a role that is only available to one specific group. There's no mixing of public and private content at the same time right now. So you can't have an article in a group and have it be public, and then have another article in the group and be private. It's a pretty big loss, but since group implements node access okay, or it implements node access, adding that in isn't something that would be that difficult. It's just not there. Multiple parent groups are not currently supported in D7, and I believe it's in the works for D8. There's a patch for it in D7, but it's not there, and it can be a bit of a drawback, but I haven't run into it that many times. Most of the times, things only need to have one parent group, especially since you can have subgroups and hierarchies. And since it hasn't been around as long as organic groups, there's fewer pre-built integrations. But the caveat to that is, since it's all entity-based, it works with anything that works with entities. It has probably one of the best implementations of Entity API that I've seen. And if something has been, or if organic groups is being integrated with something, it shouldn't be a problem to take that implementation and port it over to group, because you're going to be doing the same logic on what you're integrating with, just with group functions instead of organic group functions. So let's take a look at specifically how group is built, its interface, and kind of specific things about group. Let's take a look at the architecture. So everything is a custom entity, as I mentioned before, your groups, your group memberships, and your group roles. So these are all defined as their own entities. They all have classes associated with them, which means that when you want to work with them, you're calling methods instead of random functions that you don't really know if they exist. It also means that there's nothing else interacting with them that you don't want, because they're their own thing. The only thing interacting with them should be things that interact with entities, or things that were built to interact with groups, unlike with organic groups where you get things interacting with nodes that you don't really want interacting with groups. To make an entity a child of a group, since it only comes with node and group by default, this is one of the things I've had to implement twice. I've integrated users and files, and I'm probably going to do a commerce order eventually here soon. So this is how group does it for node. And this is all you need to make group recognize that an entity is a child of, or could be a child of a group. But if you want to actually have the interface and be able to manage this at all, you have to implement the access control and integrate with the entity's interface. So you have to call a form alter on the edit hook. You have to call the hook access control for the entity type. You have to do those kinds of things. And we have some code examples here. Comparing organic groups to group. So add a member to a group. This is the solution I found for organic groups. Now, full disclosure, I haven't worked with organic groups in a while, and I'd never really gotten into the back end of it, so there might be a better solution here. If you know one, let me know, and I'll happily update my slides, but this is what I found through Google. So this is organic groups. It's very long, it's a bit of a mess, and it's a bit hard to understand where all the values are coming from. This is group, right? You have your user object, you have a group object, and you call the add member function on the group object. Getting all members of a group. This is organic groups. It is a function, but the arguments for the function I'm not sure make a ton of sense. I'm not sure why node's there or why there's an empty array. So it's not very easy to understand what's going on. Also, the function is named kind of oddly. For a group, it's group load and then group get members. Super simple. And then if you wanted to say get all members of all subgroups for that group, it's group get members recursive. So there's a lot of extra functionality built into group where there's just methods there for you to use. You don't have to necessarily go building them out yourself. Getting all nodes in a group. So I couldn't find an answer I was happy with for organic groups. There might be one out there, but I didn't find it through Google. I assume it has something to do with writing an entity field query with an entity reference based on organic group fields, but I didn't find anything that conclusively said this is how you do it. In group, it's group get entities of type node, and that'll work for any entity that you integrate with group. And then to get all entities in a group is group get entities. So that would return all nodes, all group memberships, all subgroups, any other entities that have been integrated with it. It's extremely simple. It's extremely helpful when it's all just there. And you might be thinking, oh great, so all these functions are there, but how are they documented or commented? So let's take a look at the doc blocks and the comments that are with them. So this is add member, right? It's a fairly simple function, but it's got 10 lines of doc block here explaining, give it the UID and you can give it an optional array of values, but it makes the point to call that you can't change the group ID or the user ID in those values. Like it tells you that if you change those, it's not going to do anything, just flat out. All right, so that's add member. What about getting members? So this is a simple function, but it still has a doc block telling you exactly what you're going to get back. You're going to get back an array of group membership entities instead of, say, getting back an array of user IDs or an array of user objects. You know exactly what you're going to be getting back here. And then group get entities. So this gets all the child entities, right? It's got a couple pre-built options in here, flat and reset. I'm not quite sure what reset does, but I assume it's useful somewhere. And then it tells you in the return that if you choose flat, it's going to flatten the results down to one giant array instead of being an array keyed by entity, bundle, and the entity ID. And then within that function, there's a comment in the flat implementation that says, we run entity load result through array values to prevent people from making the false assumption that we still return entity IDs as key arrays, array keys. So it's thinking ahead for you that you don't want people assuming the array keys are value or are identifiers, and it's just getting rid of them, and then it's commenting out here. So people that go in and look at it know what's happening. So, and then group get entities of type. Once again, there's a couple of different options here, right? You specify the entity type, the bundle, and then it tells you get an array of child entities of a certain type and optionally bundle, keyed by their entity ID. So you know exactly what you're getting out of it. Now, this may seem repetitive, but I'm just trying to illustrate that everything in this module has a doc block like this and has comments like I've shown. And it's not just like core group. So this is gnode form alter. This integrates group with the node edit form. And there's two really specific comments here about some of the logic that's involved with adding the fields to the form. So right, it says if a user can't bypass group access or administer the parent group, and we already have a nid or gid, we're either on a node edit or a group node add form. So it's telling us exactly what it's looking for in the if statement, which I forgot to include. The other one is a very specific use case, and you could just update this if statement to make it work, but there's 3 lines of comment explaining what this if statement is looking for, and if you're going to modify it, this is what it needs to pass. All right, I believe that is all the comments and doc blocks I have. So we can now get into the live demo. This is the dangerous part of the presentation. Let's see here. I believe that's what I wanted. Yes. Uh-oh. Oh. My presentation disappeared. All right, this is going great. There we go. Live demo, here we go. All right, so I've set up a vagrant box. I've made a couple of modifications to it. I've disabled the overlay in the toolbar, installed add minimal, installed masquerade, created a couple of test users, but I haven't done anything with group yet. So if we go to modules, and we go over to group. All right, so group, this is all provided when you download a group. There's the base group module. There's group add, which handles forcibly adding users to a group. That's not implemented with the base group, which is nice. So if you don't like his implementation, you can build out your own, and it's not going to interfere with anything. And that's true for all of these. Group invite is allowing users to invite other users to a group. Group member profiles is building out different profiles for group memberships. Group node is obviously the integration with node, and subgroup is integration with group. So we'll turn on node, group, and gadd for all these. Oh, that's nice. I'll turn it on. All right, so here we go. So unlike most modules, group defines its own top-level menu item. It's a bit odd, but I feel it's justified in how complex and how expansive group can be. It really makes sense for it to be up at the top versus being at content, because it's not really content. It's more organizing and configuring, how you want groups to be displayed and how you want to interact with the content. So we have group types. You can think of these as pretty much identical to content types. It's just an entity bundle. We'll create one for, let's say, school. So we now have a group type called school. Now, each group type has permissions associated with it. You'll notice that this looks a lot like, let's turn this off. All right, you'll notice that this looks a lot like Drupal core, and it looks very familiar. It's pretty much, you have permissions for administering the group, administering group members, accessing the membership overview page, viewing individual member pages. Pretty much a lot of the permissions that you want by default are just going to be here. Edit own membership, edit group, delete group, join group, leave group. So you can you can add people to a group and make sure they can't leave unless you let them. Viewing the group page, viewing other members, being able to add people, and being able to create subgroups. Now, what's missing here is node stuff. Let's make sure that got enabled. All right. So now it re-implements all the permissions that Node has. So you have specific permissions for viewing content, creating new content, edit own, edit any, and this is going to be specific to each group of that group type. And these are the roles up here. You have anonymous, which is going to be a not logged in user, outsider, which is going to be a logged in user that's not a member of the group, member, which is going to be any member of the group, and administrator. So roles can be defined per group type. So each group type can have its own set of roles. Let's add, say, the school admin role, because we're in the school. Now you might be wondering why I did that, since we already have an administrator role. The administrator role isn't actually a group type role. So group in D7 did something weird where it had specific group type roles and it also had global roles. It's kind of confusing, it's kind of nice, but it's not really used that often, so it disappeared in D8. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete this administrator role because we're not going to use it and it can confuse people. So this would be where you'd manage global roles, but we're just going to be working with group type specific roles. So we have an administrator in the school admin, which is perfect. Let's create a school group. So you just go to add group, school. What is this? University. Yep, there we go. University of Drupal. And this will take you to the group page. This is pretty bland by default. There's not a whole lot of control in what gets displayed here. There's manage display, I believe. But you're going to be wanted, so you're going to either want to use display suite or panels or something to change up that template, because the default page is very bland. But you'll see that we have an add article and add basic page. Since I'm an administrator, I get all the permissions always. So I could create an article in this group, or I could create a basic page. I can also edit the group, so I can change the name and set the alias, I guess. There's also a membership page. This should look very familiar because it looks a lot like the user membership page for Drupal. And it implements a lot of the same update options, right? Remove selected members, approve selected requests, decline, block, unblock, add role, remove role, and break inheritance, which we'll get into a little bit later. For the edit operations, this edits the actual membership, so you can add a role, or you can block the person. Apparently I removed myself. Let's add myself back in. All right, and then you can manage or look at the metadata. So since this is kind of a middle object between a group and a user, you have information about when this group membership was added and who added it, and you can also add fields to this. So you can store other information here. All right. So that's pretty much members. As I showed you, there's this add member. This is the add member form through group add. It's a real simple autocomplete. Let's say we want to add Maggie admin to the group as a school administrator. So now we have a school with administrator, but we need stuff inside of it to make it actually useful. Let's go back to group types. Add another group type called maybe a class, right? And let's create some roles, because there's probably going to be more roles for a class than just administrator. So class admin, let's say student, and teacher. And now let's set the permissions for each of those group roles. So let's see, we probably want the admin to be able to administer group members. We probably want to give them most of the admin settings. Yeah, we probably want them to be able to delete the group. We don't want them to be able to leave, viewing the group and the members, adding new people, administering all the content. Try and do this fairly quickly here. And there's not going to be any subgroups of a class probably, so we don't give them any of those. A student, let's say that they want to be able to submit basic pages. So view content, create new content, edit own content, delete own content. And a teacher will be able to do articles and basic pages, but we won't give them permissions to delete. Well, yeah, we should probably give them permission to delete everything in case somebody posts something inappropriate. Let's see, teachers should probably also be able to view the group members, right? That looks pretty permissive. All right, so now if we go back to University of Drupal, we notice that there's not an add subgroup thing here, right? We can't add a class. That's because we haven't fully configured this the school group type. So if we go back to group types and we go to config now, there's a group owner. So when a group is created, you can set the roles that they get assigned. So like say you're actually allowing users to create groups, you'd want to give them an admin role, maybe a limited one, but you want to give it regardless so they can administrate that group. But we're looking for subgroups. So do we want schools to be a subgroup of schools? Probably not. but we do want classes. And this is where the inheritance comes in that I was talking about. So people who were member will receive the member role of a class. And that's probably all we want. But people who are school admin in the school should probably receive class admin in the class group type. So if we save this, we can see that it took. And now we go back to University of Drupal. We now have add class. But if we go in as Maggie admin, this is Masquerade. If you're not familiar with it, it's a great module that lets you log in as other users without actually logging in. So I am now Maggie admin, and I apparently can't view the group, which is not how it's supposed to be working. All right. Why don't we have any permissions? Oh.
So the inherited user didn't get a member. You set that up.
No, so I didn't set any permissions for the school group type. I set it for class, but not for school. So we need to give school admin the right to view the group. And for simplicity, we'll give them the right. All right, so this is how you allow them to create subgroups. You know, create school as subgroup, or create class as subgroup. That's what we want. Sorry, so now if we go back as Maggie admin, and I take a shortcut to group 1, there we go. So now we have the page, and we can add a class as a subgroup. Intro to D8, even though this is on D7. But they don't have any permissions to view it, apparently. But it was created. Let's fix our permissions again.
It's just like organic groups.
Yeah, except I actually understand what's going on here, right? So we probably want to give all members the right to view. And let's check to make sure the inheritance worked okay. So if we go to Intro to D8, and we go to Members, we can see that Maggie admin is indeed an admin, but she did not get the right role. Yeah, and it doesn't say inherited. That is very odd. But class admin. There we go. So now we go to group 2. Yes, so now she could add an article. Right. And apparently there's no great link back to the group. Should probably do something about that eventually. But she can also manage the members, right? So she's an administrator. She gets this nice little view. She can do everything that we could do before. She probably at some point revoke her access to remove her own administrator rights, because that would be bad. We can also add in the other users. So we have, let's see, who do we have? Bob Student. And I believe it's John Teacher. Yep. So she's able to add people to this class with permissions. And if we go in as, well, we've been through that pretty well. Let's see if there's anything else. So group members. So this is what I was talking about. You can add fields to the memberships. Right, so if you wanted a nickname for each of them. And now if we go back to Intro to D8, and we go to the members, and metadata for, let's say, Bob, we can give Bob a nickname of Bob. but it apparently doesn't. Okay, so it's not displaying the metadata, but it displays when you actually view it. So you can store information about a membership. It's all field configurable. I believe that's pretty much covers a lot of the default group, right? So adding content. This is important because we want content. So if you're a person that has more than one permission in a group, right? If you can add content to globally, let's say, like I can, you get this nice little field set down here where you can type in anything you want and set the parent group. So like I said, it integrates with the default interface very well. You can't really tell that it's additional because it's just kind of there, nested where it should be. And then, so this is, let's see, let's change this back to intro to D8. So then if we go in as Bob student, he should, Maggie admin. So Maggie admin can see all the content we've created, right? Even though she can, and she can also edit it. Even though she didn't create it and she's not the author of it. So that is most of group. There's a lot here. The interface is clean. The settings can be a bit complex, but they're intuitive, and I think it's quite a bit simpler than organic groups. So I believe I have one more slide. Right. So that was D7. The big differences in D8 is that in 7 we have group and we have node, and it's tied together by an attribute on the node, right? You just kind of set the group ID to the node, and that's how it tells what's what. In D8, there's this middle entity, group content, where group content references the group and the node, but it's a full entity, so you can store metadata about the relationship in that entity, right? So it's like having a group membership for every type of entity. If there's any information you want to store about that relationship, like, when it was created, how long it should be active for, different names, different uses, whatever you want, there's this middle entity to store metadata about that relationship. And that's the biggest architectural change in D8. And I believe that's all implemented through a plugin system. So it's about 10 lines of code to add a new entity as a child of a group. It's very similar to D7. So, anybody have any questions or comments? Larry.
So in D8, they have the interstitial entity there. What does that do to the views integration? Organic groups, D7, organic groups version 1 had that intermediary object which made doing anything with views or panels was a huge pain in the neck. They got rid of that in version 2, and it made it really easy to go into using panels. How will this work in D8?
I haven't built it personally, but I've seen a couple issues come through for new relationships with them, and this seemed to go through very well. I imagine it's a bit more painful, but not that much more. He's pretty good about, Christian is pretty good about adding in things that make developers' lives easier. So if there's any way to automate it or make it easier, he's going to implement that. All right, any other questions? Yes?
Do you know if the node can use the group concept, or is it in more than one group?
So I believe in D8, if it's not possible, it's going to be. I'm not specifically familiar with the D8 multiple parents thing, but with this group content, I don't see why it wouldn't be. All right, any other questions? All right.
It's not related to organic groups.
Sure.
In your instance, like your local environment, how did you configure it to load the pages so fast?
I just use Drupal VM. Yeah, it's maintained by Jeff Geerling, who's supposed to be here but isn't. It's a Vagrant box, so it's its own little VM, all provisioned by Ansible. It's really useful. I'll check it out. All right, awesome. Yeah, that's the end. The slides are available up on GitHub. I'm sure there'll be a link somewhere on the Drupal campsite. And that's it. Thanks for attending.